Well, Tyson Fury beat Deontay Wilder Saturday in the rematch of the only fight Fury hadn't won. My first job out of college was in Las Vegas. I felt incredibly lucky. Joy and I were both at the fight. Both had pretty good seats and great perspective on it, I thought. And it kind of made me reminisce as I was flying home after the fight. I started thinking a lot about my career in Las Vegas and the great fights I'd seen. So I thought, the boxing's always been as good as the heavyweight division, and kind of my looking back in my lifetime, looking back, all of the great heavyweights were the most something. They were the most something. And today we go back. Joy will help me on this. What are they the most?
All right, Colin, what award would you give Muhammad Ali?
First great fighter of my life. I would call him the most gifted, not only as an athlete, the most athletic. I thought his verbal tenacity, his IQ, his understanding. He was a gold medalist at 18 years old. He won his first heavyweight title at 22 years old. He was the thinking man's fighter, 56-5. Of course, there's that sad fight at the very end against Larry Holmes. But Muhammad Ali in my lifetime was the most gifted heavyweight ever.
How about George Foreman?
There's two George Foremans. I want to talk about the older George Foreman. He's the most beloved. His George Foreman grill sold 100 million units. My mom bought one of those. God, I ate a lot of chicken sandwiches. Early George Foreman was feisty, a disruptor, difficult. And then older George Foreman was much more likable with the same knockout power. He's the oldest living world heavyweight boxing champ in history. We never got the Foreman-Tyson fight that all of us wanted, but he won the Michael Moore fight, and I think there's a place in his heart as he really changed as a human being at about the 35, 40-year-old mark.
What award would you give Larry Holmes?
He's definitely the most boring. Larry was feisty, not interested in the media, always felt disrespected. What's interesting, he won his first 48 professional fights, was more of a jabber than a knockout puncher. He had one of the great jabs of all time. He holds the record for the longest heavyweight title streak in modern boxing history. And to this day, there's not a lot of Larry Holmes fans. And he knows it, and it's why he's always been so defiant and crusty.
What award would you give Mike Tyson?
He's the most feared. Mike not only won fights, but he won them quickly and decisively and punitively. Holds the record as the youngest boxer to be heavyweight champ, 20 years old. I mean, that would be like being the best NBA player at 20. It just almost
remarkable.
Unfathomable. He won his first 19 pro fights, 12 by knockout, and 12 in the first round. 50-6 is his record. I did think in his last post-incarceration, he never quite put the time in. You could beat him, perhaps not stylistically, but Mike was a grinder and a historian early in his career, post-incarceration. I thought he was a sloppier fighter, more reliant on the knockout.
What award would you give Evander Holyfield?
It's certainly in my eyes, to me, he's the most respected heavyweight ever. Often overlooked. At first, he was a light heavyweight. People didn't embrace him. People didn't think he had the punching power. He may have had one of the great chins. Nobody could take a punch like Evander Holyfield. Only four-time heavyweight champion and a total grinder. You know, people forget. He was going to fight Tyson. It was the fight that everybody thought Tyson would destroy him, and then Mike goes to prison, and he has to wait. And he gets he's a man of great religious conviction, but he felt like he kind of lost a little bit of his focus, lost a fight or two, and then Mike came out. He shocked the world and asked Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson, after he lost to Holyfield the first time, only time in Mike's career, at the podium after the fight, looked over at Evander Holyfield. This shows you the respect. And he said, man, you had no idea how much I respect you. You are a great fighter. I would be honored, said Tyson, to fight you again. I hope you give me a second opportunity. Of course, there was a big payday with that. But even Tyson, I think, I saw Tyson and Holyfield in the ring together Saturday night.
Yeah.
you have to respect the man Evander Holyfield.
How about Lennox Lewis?
To me, Lennox is the most underrated. I've gotten into arguments about this. I don't know. He's from Great Britain. 41, 2-1, 32 knockouts. He didn't have the punching devastation of Tyson. Maybe he didn't have the elegance of Ali. But I always, when Lennox Lewis fought Mike Tyson, I thought it was an absolute, utter mismatch. I thought he manipulated him and toyed with him. A three-time heavyweight champ. I don't think it's almost like the golfer Rory McIlroy. For some reason, we just, we put our arms around Tiger and Mickelson. We put our arms around international. Greg Norman was wildly popular. Sometimes some guys click and others don't. I think within boxing, we know how great Lennox Lewis is. I've always felt he's underrated.
Vladimir Klitschko.
Strangely, the most irrelevant. UFC was emerging. So you were post-Tyson. You had a Russian fighter who held the title longer than anybody. He wasn't stylistically as graceful. He wasn't as flashy, perhaps not as verbal. And the UFC was emerging, and boxing kind of felt lost at sea. And Klitschko had the title seemingly forever, but it just wasn't, there wasn't a water cooler quality. You didn't talk with your buddies about him like you did Tyson or Ali.
Not compelling.
He just wasn't as compelling. That's not a knock on him. We've talked about this. Sometimes we embrace people. Joe Namath wasn't nearly as good as many other quarterbacks, but we put our arms around Joe Namath. There was a glamour and a stardom to it.
And finally, what award would you give Tyson Fury?
I think he's the most unique. Physically, he's 6'9", 270. I've never seen a boxer that looks like him. I would say he rivals Ali in his ability to verbalize his thoughts. He sings after fights. He comes from a boxing family. He's talked about his depression and thoughts of suicide. I mean, he added 16 pounds for this fight and looked in better shape. He's a complete unique personality. He's unique in size. He's unique in his sort of ability to verbalize what he's thinking. He's an open book. I mean, there's no facade. There's no shield. He'll tell you everything about his life. He's as unique as any heavyweight champ I think we've ever had. He's kind of the opposite of Larry Holmes. Fascinating, not really interested in... He's looking for the knockout at all times.
He certainly was in this fight.
Speak for yourself coming up next. It's great to have you on a Monday. The team this morning, as I walked in, said, "Oh, Colin, you're going to love this story." The Packers general manager came out and said, "Absolutely, I would consider drafting a quarterback." Now the Packers have the 30th pick, so the quarterback they're talking about, to me, feels like Jordan Love at Utah State, who had an unbelievable sophomore year. Then they lost coaches, they had turnover, they had injuries, and he had not terrible, but he had a pretty average junior year. And so he's a junior now. But his sophomore year, you can go YouTube him. He was a monster. And so, I don't know how this is going to play to Brett Favre, but Brett Favre was 35 when the Packers drafted Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is 35. He's not as healthy as he once was. Jason Whitlock is joining me. I'm interested in your take. Is it a time to draft another quarterback in Green Bay?
Yeah, I don't blame him. I would be a little bit concerned about Aaron Rodgers in terms of his attitude. I think he says he wants to play a long time, but Aaron Rodgers is a guy that's hard to read. I think some of your questions about him as a leader, I think, resonate in Green Bay. And so, yeah, you should prepare for the future and draft a quarterback. And I think it's an indication that, hey, maybe only one Super Bowl is all we're going to get out of Aaron Rodgers. Let's prepare for what's next.
Yeah, and I also think, Jason, when Mike McCarthy left and the numbers went down slightly, it does create a realization that he is declining as a professional athlete, which, by the way, before Tom Brady, all quarterbacks at 35, 36 sort of decline. That's the way the game worked. Good speak for yourself today. Interested in this conversation. Thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow. It's The Herd.